Hi, y'all. Welcome to Friday of Rejection Con. I am Tara with EmiBot, and if you guys don't know me or EmiBot, we are here sponsoring this session today, and I'm moderating for Todd Kane about culture by design, not default. I love this topic. I think it is such a smart way to go about building your teams. It's all about building high performance teams and MSPs. And if you guys don't know Todd Kane, Todd is amazing. So we got to really meet, I think it was at Can IT Con earlier last year, I suppose. And he has spent over a decade developing a management framework to help MSPs increase their margins and reduce employee turnover. And that's awesome. We all know how hard it is to basically keep our people happy and keep them on our staffs, right? And hiring people is so difficult. And I think it's getting harder and harder, honestly, for our MSP. And his company, Evolved Management, provides guidance and resources to enable MSPs to reach their full potential. And if you haven't had a chance to check out his videos on LinkedIn, he constantly drops knowledge on all of us. And I just appreciate everything he's had to say. And I'm going to bring him out here. So please welcome Mr. Todd Kane.
Hey Tara, how's it going?
Hi. Good. How are you doing on this Friday?
I'm excellent, thank you. I'm very excited to be here. This is fantastic.
Yeah. We are so excited to have you. And I'm about to pull up your slide deck and you can get going on this.
Okay. All right, let's get into it, everybody. We are doing a session today, culture by design, not default, building a high performance MSP. Now, this comes from a quote, the very quotable person, sort of mid career for me, a mentor of mine. He used to be very adamant about corporate culture, and this was the quote that he used to say a lot: "Is you corporations often built companies by default, not by design." And the idea of this is quite simple: that culture will grow organically, whether or not you want it to, and whether or not it takes the shape that you want or not. So it's better to be intentional about these things because that will produce better results for you. So that's really what we're going to get into today. I'll give you a bit of a background on me. I'm sure many of you of attending have sort of heard my story. If you've seen Service Manager Cohort, it's a monthly webinar that I run with Kyle Christensen. And we're always talking to operators, kind of second in command, COO type approach. And may have heard my story but I'm sure there's many of you that have not heard my story. So I'll give you kind of the quicker version of this essentially that I was essentially the neighborhood nerd, and in my neighborhood, got a computer very early on, and ended up sort of falling my way into having a consulting company before I'd graduated high school. And I won't get into too much of the details. Give you guys the shorter version of the story, but eventually I got rolled up into a very high growth consulting organization, and it was so high growth at some point. I grew up in Calgary, Canada, which is kind of like the Dallas or Houston of Canada, very much an oil town. And when I was coming into this part of my career, oil was $200 a barrel and VMware was a brand new thing. So there was just money flowing in the streets for IT consulting. So great times, absolute heyday. But the flip side of this is that we were hiring 20 to 30 people a week for a sustained period. Now, this is the kind of growth that is beyond management for any type of organization of any scale. And we had to learn really quickly how we're able to grow the team, and more importantly, how we're able to scale the leadership of those teams in order to have enough leaders in the organization to create a great culture. And the company was excellent at designing and maintaining culture. It was really important that that culture be maintained as the company continued to grow. So this was a really wild, awesome experience that was sort of my crash course MBA, moving from the technical side of the world to the leadership and management side, and learned a ton of stuff that to this day is still really, really valuable. And these are the types of sort of lessons and things that I'm trying to promote and educate and for people in the channel. A lot of these systems and tools are very accessible. None of this is sort of wild secret sauce that takes decades to understand or learn. takes maybe some of that time, years to understand and be able to implement, sure, but this is very accessible. And I can guarantee you, you're going to come away from this talk with a few tidbits, some bits of knowledge that'll be really practical and be able to help you out in designing a culture for your organization. Now, I want to talk about the reactive growth trap. So I talked a bit about my adventures in Longview Systems. This high growth. It was a VAR at the day. They had an MSP division, but this was like 2005, 2004. So it was pretty early in the MSP growth path. Now, there I focus more on sort of the VAR side, project management, project delivery, and co-managed IT because we were working in fairly large enterprise organizations. Some of the biggest oil companies and airlines in Canada, for example, and that was a really great experience, and that taught me a ton and kind of gave me this entry into the operations side of the business. And my other exposure after that organization was with a fairly well recognized MSP called Fully Managed out of Vancouver. And Fully Managed is a pretty well recognized name, certainly in Canada, but even in the MSP channel. And this was also the birthplace of IT Glue. So we had this internal tool that Chris Day, one of the owners of Fully Managed, recognized sort of the potential for this thing and spun that out as a separate company. And this was another great example of the work that we were doing in scaling an organization at a really high pace. So the story at FM, we tripled revenue, doubled headcount, increased gross margin by double digits. And one of the interesting aspects of this is that we actually slashed turnover by double digits as well. And a lot of this was due to the work that we were intentionally doing on culture. Um, so this gave me a really interesting peek into how culture really mattered. I understood the basis of this from my experience at Longview Systems. I'd done a couple of turnarounds in telcos, and the culture was not great. This was where I sort of learned the term golden handcuffs, where there was people working in those organizations that were almost entirely checked out. They really didn't care what was happening in that organization, but they couldn't leave because they had options and some stock that was going to vest over a period of time. And they were just waiting for that to happen so they could check out. And I was able to work within that and develop some systems and frameworks and support those teams to take that organization from bleeding money all over the floor in order to being profitable. Some of that was cultural. A lot of it was just systems and tools that we utilized in order to support a culture that pulled away from this aspect of relying on those golden handcuffs. Um, Interestingly, if you think about this, the scale of these organizations were very different in certain ways, but all started from the same place and very similar to a lot of the MSPs that you guys are operating in, that you start in a place what I call the five guys in a room strategy, where everyone can kind of fit in a room. In Longview, when I first joined the organization, we fit in a large boardroom, and we would have discussions and presentations and meet pretty regularly, and everyone could kind of converse and see the CEO and here's what's happening, and it was very easy to transmit information. Now, as we continued to grow very rapidly, that really fell apart. So, what I see happening in a lot of MSPs is once you grow past this five, certainly past 10 people point, everything starts to fall apart. The five guys in a room strategy just does not work. And you get stuck in this mentality of constantly chasing busy. Like, it's great that you're growing, but if you're not putting these things in place to protect the culture of the organization and put systems and processes in place to protect the people to get the work done, it gets really hard really quickly. So you have to be able to adapt to these changes. And I see this again and again with the organizations that I work with now in a consulting capacity, is constantly running into this busy. And I really hate the word busy in any organization. I often sort of jokingly, but very seriously tell people, try banning the word busy in your organization for 2 weeks. It's a really interesting experiment because, quite frankly, busy comes up as a defense mechanism for prioritizing other things. And this is essential to understanding this reactive growth trap, where there's so much coming at you all day. Like, we work in a really high paced industry with a lot of conflicting priorities. Client needs this, boss said that. CEO said something different. Account manager's hounding me now for this other thing, for this other client. I keep getting emails from an upset client. There's all kinds of stuff that we need to defend against and fight with, and it ends up being very reactive. We're fighting the last thing that comes into your inbox or the last person to send you a DM, and we need to be able to protect our time and build systems and frameworks that we can be more intentional about how we're approaching the work. And I'm pretty adamant that I feel like this is one of the big differences between someone being uh, really busy, quote unquote, versus like getting a lot done and being productive. It's a sense of autonomy and control over the work that they're able to manage. And so this becomes really essential to building a healthy culture in your organization as you continue to grow, is having some of these systems that protect people from the busyness that really gets in the way here. Okay. So as Tara says, it's everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. Perfect. It's so true. Okay. All right, so we want to get you out of that reactive growth trap and start to be more intentional about this. As I said before, culture is being built every day by accident or by design. It doesn't matter whether or not you've thought about culture. And a lot of organizations, they tend to think about culture, but not in a way that leads them to any type of output or action around this. It's often reflective, and certainly what I often see is that it's often aspirational. And this shows up a lot with organizations when we try to talk about goals and core values and things like that. And we talk about these core values like integrity and service, and it's all very fluffy. And if you look around the organization, it's often not reflected in the real goings on of the organization. So this is where that gap starts to show up. That is really important to understand, that the culture that is being built in the organization is pervasive and continues regardless of whether or not you're looking after it or not. So of course you're going to end up with a culture that you didn't intend if you never intentionally looked at the culture. So that's really what we want to focus on and look at here. So I want to tell you a bit of a story about two organizations, and we'll kind of go through, sorry to bring you back to COVID, but COVID was a really important reflection point for a lot of organizations. So you'll see a couple of companies here that were, kind of coming past this 1 million stage where the five guys in a room strategy was working fairly well for everybody, and then through COVID, a bunch of things started to change around the dynamics of how they were doing work with their organizations and how they were able to manage that work and respond to the needs of the customers. A lot of organizations were somewhat well prepared for this, and a lot of other organizations were not. And what we saw was everyone sort of managed this in different ways. There was definitely a bump as more project work. Everyone was sent home. We bought more equipment. We bought, maybe some more SSL VPN or some terminal systems for remote work, whatever the case would be, right? So there was a huge benefit to a lot of organizations. But then what happens pretty typically when people hit this $1 million mark, this is what we call Death Valley in the MSP industry. That 1 to 5 million transition is really difficult for people, and the reason why is that this is where the five guys in a room strategy breaks down, and management needs to become more intentional. The culture of the organization will continue in its own way, whether or not you're working on it or not. And that becomes a huge inflection point as to whether or not you're actually able to step forward and grow on something that is providing more value for the organization. And a classic analogy for this, if you think about it, is if you have cracks in the foundation of a house and you add 3 floors, like those cracks are going to magnify, and you're going to end up having a real bad time with home maintenance. Whereas if you have a real solid foundation that you're building upon, then this becomes a lot easier. You can build sky high as far as you want, and the structure of that organization will support you. So what you'll notice is sort of this green line that ticked up, and they saw accelerated growth after during COVID and after COVID as well. And the other organization really just plateaued. They had a couple of bumps, things went well, things went bad, but they just really couldn't get out of this reactive growth trap, and keeps them stuck at that $1 million mark. So if you're an organization that is in this 1 to 5 million, and interesting industry stat, is that 90% of the industry is sub $1 million, which I find to be a really fascinating statistic if you think about it. It just demonstrates the actual size of the industry is so broad and huge that as big as we think our industry is, all the organizations, most of you guys are probably above 1 million, but you're kind of the 10% of the industry, which is wild. So getting past that 1 million and certainly getting past that 5 million are the first two hurdles that you will have to cross in order to scale and grow your organization. And I guarantee you, this will not happen unless you get the culture of your organization aligned and focused on the things that will produce a more scalable and more profitable business going forward. Okay. So let's look at the difference between these two companies and what this potentially feels like. Okay. So the red line, there's probably a lot of burnout happening. There's tech debt, because a lot of these organizations and most MSPs, when they're small, they're quite scrappy. They'll pull together and win whatever business they can in order to be successful. And there needs to be this pivot point where you reflect on, who do we want to work with? What are our best customers that we work with? And why are they our best customers? And almost inevitably, there's two things that show up here as who are your best customers. Your best customers have cultural alignment with your organization. They believe in the same things. They understand the value of technology. That is a huge differentiation, because if you go to these TBRs and meet with your customer and say, look, here are some things that we want to change. These are the things that we want to build into the infrastructure of your organization because this is the value it will produce for you. And there's two types of conversations you often end up there. Is one will say, this sounds fantastic. Tell me how to do this. We'll set aside some budget. We're going to get going. And the other goes, oh my goodness, this is very expensive. The last guy only charged us $400 a month. I don't know that we can do this. You automatically, that's a pretty big differentiation as to whether or not they value technology as a component of their organization, and whether or not you're having alignment with them around the culture of what they're trying to build and how they're utilizing technology. If you're just chasing after everything and there is no priorities, everything's a priority, you're going to end up burnt out, because there's an endless list of things to do in this industry, and people will just continue to pile forward and feel really frustrated with the lack of progress that they're making in all parts of the business, right? um, Thanks, Lyle. Inconsistent service. Again, if you're not building processes and systems, and people don't have a reference for what good looks like and how they're supposed to approach the work, everyone's just winging it and feeling their way through it. And this works fairly well, again, in this five guys in a room strategy, because it feels somewhat cohesive. Everyone's kind of seeing the same things and acting the same way. As soon as you're not sitting in the same room, all of that really falls apart. And then the biggest thing that you tend to see here is just management by crisis, because there is no stability, there's no predictability, there's no local leadership, and there's no culture of accountability. Everything becomes a crisis, and you're constantly reacting to everything. And then you fall into this reactive growth trap, and there's just no scale to the organization. So that's that red line, that grower plateau slide that I was showing here. This is what they're fighting with. They may have some growth, but they're constantly bumping up to the ceiling of what they're capable of doing as a team, because the culture of the organization just simply doesn't support it. Versus the other organization that accelerated out of COVID, and now they have great ownership. They have high engagement with their staff, service is excellent, and they have systems and processes that support the business. There's an expression that I really like that's pretty apt here. See if I remember what this is. Um, Processes run the business and people run processes. I like that as a good reference for how to think about approaching this, right? Because it is a bit of a cultural element of, like, how do we do things around here? There's a great way to think about this, that a good definition of culture is the collective behaviors within an organization. That is a great way to think about what the culture of the organization is. And one of my favorite quotes about culture, I'll probably sprinkle this a couple of times in here, is culture is defined by what you tolerate. And if you continue to tolerate clients that don't align with your values as an organization, you continue to suffer under the tyranny of now, of this reactive growth trap. That's the culture that you're going to bear out in your organization. And I can tell you from experience in working with organizations that have made this transition, where I have this one client. He when he met with me, he literally showed up to a call with me to chat about working together, and he said, "Help me! Like I just need some help. I'm beyond frustrated." And now, a couple of years later, he's done all the work, and he shows up to calls with me on occasion and says, "Tell me what to do. Like I don't have anything to do." Right? Like his whole team is just taking on everything. He's working on biz dev. He's having a great time, and everything feels really easy. Right? So like, just because you're stuck in a space that is problematic and not producing the value that you need, you can absolutely escape this if you put these systems in place. Okay. Now, this should be the red alarm, 5 alarm fire statistic that everyone in business should be super, super afraid of. A 2024 Gallup survey poll demonstrated that only 23% of staff are engaged. This is horrifying. Okay. If you put this in perspective, if you're paying $100 in salary, you're getting $23 worth of output. Now, not that you should be expecting $100 of output every time. That's not necessarily what we're suggesting here. But holy moly, 23% of people that are actively engaged in their work, and the rest are just sort of riding the sidelines and doing the bare minimum to stay employed and what they think they can get away with. Pretty horrid, right? I see this time and time in organizations that I work with, where there is a core group of people that align with the 80-20 rule. 20% of your staff are producing 80% of your results, guaranteed in almost every circumstance. So finding who those people are and giving them all the support they need is pretty important as well. All right, let's get to how we actually implement and do this and make these changes. Okay, I love this as a framing for how you want to think about how to approach this. Management is how you shape future behavior. Okay, so stop being focused on trying to correct every mistake as a manager or an owner. And I see this as a pretty cardinal sin for a lot of people. Is all of the interactions that they have with staff are centered around, hey, you did this last week, in the future I need to see these things. Hey, you haven't entered your time. Hey, you didn't update this documentation. Hey, you didn't tell the client that this was the status of this project. A lot of this is always reflective on the past. And sure, it's instructive, but it doesn't help to correct anything. The past is immutable. The only thing that you can influence, especially when working with other people, is what can we do in the future? What future behavior can I help you produce to produce better results? Okay. So one of the really key points to this is, you know, consciously stop giving so much negative feedback and be more intentional about giving positive feedback, and setting an expectation that these are the things that I want to see more of in the future. Because if a staff member and a leader are constantly focused on the things that didn't go well, everyone's focused on the negative. But if you start focusing on the positive and the things you want to see more of in the future, you're likely to produce more of those behaviors. Okay. So great framing. I really want you guys to resonate and understand this as a directive. Management is about shaping future behavior. Be future focused with your staff. Okay. All right, let's look at some tools and systems around this. So I want you to think GPS. Okay, so goals, processes, and system. If your team does not have GPS in place, they're lost. And I don't know about you guys. I used to be able to navigate stuff. Now, like, I'll be driving, 6 blocks away, and I'll still put it into the GPS. I don't know why. Maybe it's just a comfort thing, but nowadays, we could argue that technology makes us stupid, or we're just outsourcing parts of those things of our brain to the computer. That's fine too, but just take this to heart. These are the things that people need in order to be successful, and for a leadership team to be able to drive engagement. Okay. So what do we mean by goals, processes, and systems in order to give you this GPS system? Okay. I want you to have objective goals. And what I mean by objective goals is, this is something that you can objectively measure as a output of the work. Okay. So a lot of circumstances, I see owners that don't have an explicit expectation of what's supported, what's expected from staff. And it ends up with these really tough conversations of like, hey, I need you to do better. And that feels like a personal attack to a staff member who feels like they're working as hard as they can. They're put 50 hours in this week. Like, how can my boss possibly tell me that I need to do better, right? And that's a subjective judgment. So unless you have this objective measure of, hey, I need you to close 10 tickets a day and on average kind of 40-50 tickets a week, okay? And then you can have this conversation with a staff member like, okay, so Terry, Chris, they're generally closing 42 tickets a week. You're currently closing 28. And so I'm curious, like, what's the difference? What do you need? What are you caught up in? What resources can I provide for you? Right? This is a much more supportive conversation that looks at objective measures that can't really be argued with. And even if they can, hopefully you're trying to source out the distinction as to why that's not working. Okay. Next, weekly one on ones. Move at the speed of business that you want, right? So if you're meeting with people monthly, then you get some input from them. There's a lot of good data that actually suggests meeting with people monthly actually does more damage than good from a one-on-one perspective. And how can you possibly correct issues in a timely fashion if you only meet with them every month? You find out about something, you look for some direction, and it's a month later until you find out if things are actually back on track. So move at the speed of business and establish one-on-ones on a weekly basis in order to establish a certain level of trust and engagement with your staff. This is where engagement starts, you guys. Okay. And then feedback loops being really important. Give corrective feedback. And if you look at survey data, people actually want more feedback. We're afraid of it because it feels like it can be micromanagement, or you're giving people bad news, and we want to avoid that. I feel a little awkward about this. Ignore all of that. Great quote from Tim Ferriss is, a person's success in their life is often dictated by the number of uncomfortable conversations they're willing to have. Okay. I love that idea. Have those uncomfortable conversations so that they become less uncomfortable in the future. Okay. And then the other one is kind of relates to the objective goals, but manage by exception. Okay. You don't have to micromanage. You don't have to be in everything all day. You don't have to QA every single ticket that gets closed. It's not scalable. Figure out what the objective measures are and when those measures are out of band. Okay. This number is supposed to be 20. It's currently at 10. I'm going to step in and ask some questions. What do people need? Why is this happening? What info can I get to understand why we're not achieving this number? Okay. So management by exception. Set the goals, set the objective measures, and then manage when they're out of band. Okay. It gives you a lot more bandwidth to be able to focus on the things that actually require your attention versus wasting a bunch of time on what I call the TPS reports, right? So don't waste your time on all that trash. Focus on the things that will actually produce good results for you. All right. A bit of an eye chart, but I'll read through a couple of things here. I absolutely love this graphic. I may have to rebuild it just to get a higher res version of this, but this is an incredible breakdown of how to think about engagement from your staff. Okay. So, like I talked about, 80/20. So, the people up here as the high flyers, okay, this is going to be 15 to 20% of your staff. It's not a lot. But these people you need to identify early and provide every ounce of resource and support you can as a manager. Because, like I said, they're producing the absolute majority of the work and outputs that you have. And they're highly engaged. They're looking for career advancement and all kinds of support. The engaged and the belonging, these people are probably 60% of your staff. This is core. You can't have a whole team of A players. It just fundamentally won't work, right? You end up with all kinds of other problems. I've seen teams of a ton of A players and they end up eating each other alive. It's wild to watch. Okay, so you want to have the plate cleaners, as I call them. You just provide them work, they clean it up. No muss, no fuss. They're really easy to support and manage as long as you're engaging them. Okay. And then equally as identifying these high flyers, you want to then identify the demotivators, the people that are not engaged or completely disengaged. Okay. This is kind of usually 15 to 20% of your staff. And you want to focus on these people as either pushing them up into a belonging, that's number 3 stage, where they're almost engaged and pushing them up there, or you're looking to have them exit the organization. And I can tell you, when you institute a management framework, 15 to 20% of your staff probably won't survive it. Okay. They will either quit because they don't like the level of scrutiny and accountability that is now required in that organization, or they will need to be fired because they're just not providing the outputs that the organization and their role requires. Okay, so be really thoughtful about this and actually go through your team and figure out where they sit in this structured hierarchy. I occasionally run a workshop called the 9 box model that does a great way of sort of actually modeling this out so you can engage your team in a different fashion. So if might be some resources if you Google me and some of that, you can check some of that out. Okay. Again, won't go through all of this, but I want to reinforce this is based on data from, I think it was a survey by IBM and a couple of other tech organizations. They looked at who are the engaged employees, who are the unengaged employees, and what are the distinctions between these two groups of people. And if you read through a few of these, especially the ones that are the really high numbers here, right? They have opportunities to grow and learn. Someone encouraged their development. Their manager cares about them. They view their job as important to the company. They're able to do their best every day. People want to work on a winning team. Okay. I don't think a lot of people really fundamentally understand this. And if you're tolerating these people that pollute your culture in your organization, you're automatically putting a boat anchor on things and dragging down whether or not those people will remain engaged that are the high flyers. And really, all people are looking at in order to engage at work is whether or not they feel supported by their manager and that they actually have an understanding of what they're trying to produce and whether or not their work is important. Okay. So these things are absolutely fundamental in order to get people to the table and to engage and work at their highest capacity. And this is an absolute game changer for the team because like I said, you don't need a whole team of A players, but if you have even 50% of your team that is highly engaged, the culture is so much easier to work with. People love what they do. Clients are happier, people are happier. It's just a fundamentally different place to work. Okay. So take this to heart and understand that I think good way to imagine this is management is culture. Okay. I want you to put aside all of these thoughts of, I don't want to be a micromanager. All of that is noise and garbage. It's not true. Okay. If you're managing people well and establishing a level of trust and providing service based leadership where you're smothering them with support and giving them every resource they need to be successful, that is not micromanagement and people will appreciate it. Okay. So if you have no vision for the organization, you're going to have no alignment. So management and leadership needs to set a vision for what we're all trying to accomplish here. And it doesn't need to be high minded. It just needs to be, these are our goals. This is what we're trying to accomplish. This is the point of what we do here. That is foundationally important. Okay. No one-on-ones. They will not establish a level of trust that provides the environment for these things, and no process will lead to no scale. Okay, so these are the things that you want to be able to tick off, and how management can influence the culture. Okay, like I said, culture is defined by what you tolerate. And if you continue to tolerate things that don't align with the culture that you want in your organization, you will continue to suffer under those things as the things that you don't want. Okay. So think about this really, really deeply and be honest with yourself about what type of culture you have in your organization. And if it's not what you want to see, you have the ability to prune the garden. You can't tell the culture what it is, but you can create the conditions within that garden, that ecosystem that produces the culture that flourishes and has beautiful flowers and healthy trees and great fruit, all of those things. That's what we're looking to produce. So recognize a manager's and a leader's integral position in fostering the conditions to create that culture. All right. So I wrap it up here. If you guys want to connect with me, if you haven't, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I tend to talk about a lot of this stuff: culture, management, leadership capabilities, all of those things. And if you have any questions or anything, I can take that now. But yeah, really encourage you guys to connect with me on LinkedIn. Like Tara said, I'm doing a ton of videos and posts and trying to drop as much knowledge as I can into the ecosystem. And really appreciate you guys' time and attention. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, that was so good. I actually just wrote down culture is defined by what you tolerate. Like
Yeah,
that
one of my favorite
line,
quotes. Yeah.
that is amazing. Where did that come from?
It's from
What
Mark
is that?
Horseman, Manager Tools.
Okay.
He's a
I
big
love that.
inspiration for me. Yeah.
Well, now that's going to be an inspiration for a LinkedIn post for me, honestly. So I do have some questions here. So let's
Okay.
move your slides backstage and let's get into them. So, our first one here is from Lyle. In your experience working with MSPs that scale successfully, what are the non negotiables when it comes to intentionally designing a culture that not only attracts top tier technical talent, but retains them? Ooh,
Okay.
that's a,
So,
you went
I
deep
did a
here.
post. Yeah, I did a post fairly recently on this, that got a bunch of attention. I would say the first one that's non-negotiable is have a no assholes rule. Okay. Most MSPs, and if you don't have this now, you'll have some recognition of this, that there's that tech that's been there for 9 years. He knows everything about all the clients, knows where all the bodies are buried, but he's gruff. He rubs everybody the wrong way, and he gets away with a lot of stuff, right? He doesn't enter his time. He's terrible at the documentation, but he's brilliant at what he does. So, implement a no assholes rule and work with that person. Don't just say, look, you're not going to cut it here, but say, like, look, man, like, you're intelligent enough to understand the implications of being the way that you are and the way that you interact with people. Like, people are afraid to approach you. You're supposed to be a senior member of the team, and no one will talk to you because they feel like they're going to get belittled and yelled at. You need to set the tone and establish sort of some of these norms to help us out in developing that culture. And if they don't agree and they don't buy into that, they got to go. Right. So, no assholes rule, I think, is probably the most important one to that. And then the other piece would just be the things that we layered in. You got to have GPS, right? You got to have goals, processes, and systems to drive predictable behavior and produce predictable results. And then I'd say lastly is just understanding, the positivity and what the create those conditions that you want and support the people directly. And that, I think, in a lot of ways will produce a great culture.
Yeah, that's awesome. We had a rule. I mean, it was after, I mean, we'll say that this person was an asshole. We had a rule that was no untouchables because he thought he was
Mm,
untouchable. He was our longest running tech. And when we fired him because we put him on a PIP, we tried everything in our power. We probably kept him 3 years too long. And everyone thanked us on our team.
yeah.
Like, we didn't realize it was killing the team, honestly.
And I think that that's a really important point, Tara, because I think everyone notices these things. Like, if you recognize, like, the negativity that they're producing for the team, then everyone else is aware of it, guaranteed. And there's always that circumstance where that person's been there too long, they eventually get fired, and then everyone sighs. They're like, "Oh my god, like, that took so long."
I know. Why did that take so long?
Yeah.
So we have this from Mike. Where can I find Todd's 9 box model information? My Google foo, it's letting me down.
Yeah,
You could
so,
probably get a hold of Todd on LinkedIn, maybe. I don't know.
yeah, get a hold of me on LinkedIn. I can put together a workshop on this. I occasionally run a workshop. There's some posts that I have in my community ops leader, that relate around this. Nine boxes is like a lot of things I use are kind of common frameworks. So you can just Google for 9 box model if you want some information just on that program itself. Otherwise, connect with me on LinkedIn and harass me to run a workshop on 9box. I love the system. I find it so instructive. It's tactical and strategic. So I'd be happy to throw together another workshop for that.
Awesome. Okay, so let's mark that one. And then, well, this one, I like this one. We've got time maybe for two more. What
Yeah.
is one piece of advice you give new leaders who want to start shaping culture intentionally from day one?
Okay. So the first thing that I tell, especially technical leaders, if you're coming from a technical career, is your individual results no longer matter, and all the things that made you successful as a tech have very little application as to whether or not you're going to be successful as a manager. I actually rant about this a lot. That I think it's unfair that we call it a promotion to management. It is a career change. All right, fundamentally. So I think that's the first piece, is understanding like how you're measured from a success standpoint is defined by the outputs of your team, not the inputs. I don't care how hard they work. I do, but I don't. I'm interested in what they're able to produce as a team. And the way to do that and produce a great culture is what we're talking about here, is spend time with the people, make them feel like they're valued, they're understood, and they're supported, and they will give you everything. One of the best descriptions, I think, story from, again, from Longview, is me and a guy, we were working on this really gnarly problem, and it was like 2 in the morning on a Friday. Um, I guess 2 in the morning on a Saturday, I suppose, because we'd been working on this thing for 2 days, and both of it. We got to a point where like we almost gave up, and we kind of looked at each other, and we were like, "Don would be really disappointed, right?" And Don was the CEO. Like, we were judging what we would do based on a person who was not even in the room and was unaware of the work that we were doing, right? Like, that's beautiful culture, where the person is independently managing their own expectations based on what they think the people that they trust and respect would feel around what they're making a decision around, right?
Yeah, that's all. That's awesome, actually. And we've got one more. Let's sneak it in here. Let's put this one up on stage. We've got a few. So let's answer. Oh, I clicked the wrong
Drifting in
button.
the wrong
There we
direction.
go.
Yeah.
Do you know of any early warning signs that a company's culture is drifting in the wrong direction?
Yeah. So I think a lot of this goes to hallway conversations. And, if you look at books like Five Dysfunctions of a Team, I think that that's a really good indication that there's no trust, there's no accountability, there's no ability to have tough conversations. And how you will often see this is there's no disagreement, right? Like healthy, I often say, a meeting without some drama is a meeting not worth having. Like you need to get in a room and bash against each other and challenge each other's ideas, as long as you're doing it respectfully, right? That I think is a really good indication of people that are confident enough to share their ideas and disagree, but recognize like we're on the same team and we're trying to achieve the same things. We just have different perspectives about how to go about it. So if you find that no one's disagreeing with the direction of the company, but then they get in the hallway, they're like, right? That's a really good indication that the culture is starting to go sideways.
Well, and then that's something else you have to manage, right? Because then you're getting people that are like angsty. You don't have that comfort level, I guess, to
Yeah,
have those conversations. And
exactly.
you mentioned Patrick Lencioni. Any book by him, I just love. So
Me too.
if anyone doesn't read him,
Especially because they're fables, right? They're really easy
yeah,
reads, and all
yes,
the lessons are embedded. So yeah,
exactly.
Death by
Well,
Meeting,
we're
Five Dysfunctions of a Team, excellent books. Yeah,
absolutely Death by Meeting was game changing for both of our businesses, in all honesty, because we were having meetings
totally.
just to have them. And it's like,
Yep.
no, we're not doing
Yeah.
this.
So
I've
many
walked out
meetings
of
are
meetings that
there.
don't
So
have
many meetings
agendas.
on your calendar are there because of momentum. Like they've been booked weekly for like 6 months, and everyone just shows up. Like, what are we doing here? Right?
Yeah, why are we here at this point? Well, I
Yeah.
wanna thank you. This was so great. You have just dropped so much knowledge. So, everyone, find Todd on LinkedIn, connect with him. If you have any more questions, I'm sure he'd love to hear from you guys.
I would. I love engaging. Thanks, Tara.
Bye, guys.
See ya.